The winter wind had already begun its howl when Gabriel Nash rode into Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Leading a string of horses he planned to sell before the worst of the season arrived. He never imagined that within hours he would be trapped in a stranger's cabin with a woman whose name he did not even know, fighting against a blizzard that seemed determined to bury them both alive. The year was 1887, and Gabriel had spent the better part of his 26 years drifting from town to town, breaking horses and moving on before anyone could ask him to stay. He had learned young that attachment brought pain, and so he kept his heart as guarded as a bank vault. The horses whinnied nervously as the first fat snowflakes began to fall, and Gabriel urged them faster down the mountain pass, hoping to reach the town before nightfall. That was when he heard the scream. It cut through the wind like a knife, high and desperate, coming from somewhere off the main trail. Gabriel's instincts told him to keep riding, that getting involved in other people's troubles never ended well, but his conscience would not let him ignore a woman in distress. He guided his mare toward the sound, the other horses following reluctantly behind. He found her struggling with a wagon that had slipped off the narrow path, one wheel hanging precariously over the edge of a steep ravine. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with dark hair escaping from beneath her bonnet and eyes the color of summer storms. Those eyes fixed on him with a mixture of relief and wariness as he dismounted. "The wheel," she gasped, pointing at the wagon. "It happened so fast." "I tried to stop it, but—" "Step back," Gabriel commanded, already assessing the situation. The wagon was loaded with supplies, heavy enough that any wrong move could send it tumbling into the gorge below. The snow was falling harder now, making the ground slick beneath his boots. He worked quickly, unhitching the terrified horse from the wagon and securing it to a nearby tree. Then he began unloading the supplies, tossing sacks of flour and beans onto solid ground while the woman helped as best she could. His muscles strained as he wedged a large rock beneath the good wheel, giving himself leverage to pull the wagon back onto the path. "When I say pull, you pull on that side," he instructed. "And for God's sake, do not let go until I tell you." She nodded, her face pale but determined. Together they heaved against the wagon's weight, Gabriel's boots sliding in the snow as he fought for purchase. For a terrible moment, he thought they would lose it, but then the wheel caught on something solid, and the wagon lurched back onto the trail with a groan of protesting wood. They both stood there panting, the snow already dusting their shoulders white. Gabriel looked at the sky and cursed under his breath. What had been a gentle snowfall was rapidly becoming something far more dangerous. The clouds hung low and heavy, and the temperature was dropping fast. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "My cabin. It is just up the mountain, maybe 2 miles. I went into town for supplies before the weather turned." Gabriel glanced at the darkening sky again. 2 miles in this weather with loaded wagons and nervous horses might as well be 20. But what choice did they have? "We had better move fast then," he said, already reloading her wagon. She told him her name was Zara Ellsworth as they worked, her voice steady despite the cold. She had come to Arkansas 6 months ago after her father's death, inheriting the small cabin where he had planned to start a new life. She had been alone up there ever since, too stubborn to give up on her father's dream even when everyone in town told her a woman had no business living alone in the mountains. Gabriel did not tell her much about himself. There was not much to tell, or at least not much he wanted to share. Instead, he focused on getting them moving, his own horses tied to the back of her wagon while he drove her pair forward through the increasingly heavy snow. They did not make it 2 miles. They barely made it 1 before the blizzard hit in full force, the wind screaming down the mountain like a living thing. Gabriel could not see more than a few feet ahead, and the horses were panicking, pulling against their harnesses and threatening to bolt. "There!" Zara shouted over the wind, pointing to a dark shape barely visible through the white curtain of snow. "A shelter. My father built it for emergencies." It was little more than a shed, really, but it had 4 walls and a roof, which was more than they had out in the open. Gabriel drove the wagon as close as he could, then jumped down to help Zara. Together they unhitched the horses and led them inside, crowding the animals into the small space. There was barely room for the 2 of them, but it was dry and out of the wind. Gabriel pushed the door shut against the howling storm and leaned against it, catching his breath. His coat was covered in snow, his fingers numb despite his gloves. Across the cramped space, Zara was doing the same, her chest heaving as she tried to warm her hands. "How long do these storms usually last?" Gabriel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Days sometimes," Zara admitted. "Maybe longer." They looked at each other in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls, 2 strangers who had just become each other's only hope for survival. The first night was the hardest. The shelter had been built to house animals, not people, and there were no provisions beyond what they had managed to salvage from the wagon. Gabriel found an old lantern hanging from a nail and managed to get it lit, casting a weak golden glow over their refuge. The horses stamped and shifted nervously, their breath steaming in the cold air. "We need to conserve heat," Gabriel said, his practical nature taking over. "The animals will help, but we should stay close together." Zara nodded, too cold to argue about propriety. They arranged some of the flour sacks into a makeshift seat against the far wall, as far from the door as possible. Gabriel spread his bedroll over them and they huddled together, listening to the wind rage outside. "I am sorry," Zara said after a long silence. "If I had not been foolish enough to go into town so late, you could not have known the storm would come on so fast," Gabriel interrupted. "I have been traveling these mountains for years, and I did not see this coming either. But now you are trapped here because of me." "I am trapped here because I chose to help you," he corrected gently. "That was my decision." She fell silent, but he could feel her shivering against him. He shifted, trying to share more of his warmth, and felt her gradually relax. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, shaking the shelter's walls and finding every crack and crevice to push through. "Tell me about the horses," Zara said eventually, her voice soft. "The ones you were bringing to town." Gabriel found himself talking, surprising himself with how easily the words came. He told her about finding the wild mustangs in Colorado, spending weeks earning their trust before he could even get a rope on them. He described the satisfaction of gentling a horse, of seeing the moment when fear turned to understanding and partnership. He even told her about his plans to eventually settle somewhere and start a proper ranch, though he had never admitted that dream to anyone before. Zara listened without interrupting, asking questions that showed she understood horses better than most. She told him about her father's dream of breeding work horses, strong animals that could handle the harsh Arkansas terrain. He had died of pneumonia before he could even buy his first breeding pair, leaving Zara alone with nothing but the cabin and determination. "Why did you stay?" Gabriel asked. "After he died, I mean. You could have gone back to wherever you came from." "Ohio," she said. "And there was nothing to go back to. My mother died when I was young and my father was all I had. This place, this dream, it was the last piece of him I could hold on to." Gabriel understood that. He had spent his whole life running from the past, but he understood the need to hold onto something, even if it was just a memory. They talked through much of that first night, their voices low beneath the howl of the wind. Gabriel learned that Zara had taught herself to hunt and trap, that she could shoot a rifle better than most men, and that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide. She learned that Gabriel had grown up in an orphanage in Missouri, that he had never known his parents, and that the only family he had ever known was the other drifters and cowboys he met on the trail. By morning, the storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it had grown worse. When Gabriel forced the door open to check on their situation, he was met with a wall of snow that had drifted against the shelter. He had to dig them out just to close the door again. "We are going to be here a while," he said, brushing snow from his coat. Zara nodded, already rationing out the supplies they had. There was enough food for a few days if they were careful, and they could melt snow for water. The horses would need attention, though, and the shelter was not designed for a long stay. The days began to blur together. Gabriel and Zara fell into a routine born of necessity. They tended the horses, melted snow, rationed food, and tried to stay warm. The forced proximity meant there were no secrets, no walls to hide behind. They learned each other's habits, quirks, and stories. Gabriel discovered that Zara hummed when she was nervous, always the same melody that her mother used to sing. She learned that Gabriel had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking, leaving it standing up in all directions. They argued about the best way to cook beans, about whether coffee should be strong enough to strip paint or smooth and easy to drink, about everything and nothing. But they also laughed. Gabriel found himself smiling more in those snow-trapped days than he had in years. Zara had a quick wit and a talent for finding humor in their situation. When the roof started leaking on the third day, she just moved the bucket they were using for melting snow under the drip and declared they now had running water. On the fourth night, Gabriel woke to find Zara shivering violently beside him. The temperature had dropped even further, and their small fire had burned down to embers. Without thinking, he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her and sharing his warmth. She did not protest, just burrowed into his chest with a grateful sigh. "Thank you," she whispered, her breath warm against his neck. "For what? For stopping. For helping. For not leaving me alone in this." Gabriel held her tighter, feeling something shift in his chest. This woman, this stranger who had become so familiar in just a few days, was breaking through defenses he had spent a lifetime building. It terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. "I would not be anywhere else," he said, and meant it. The storm finally broke on the seventh day. Gabriel pushed open the door to a world transformed. Snow stretched in every direction, pristine and blinding white under a clear blue sky. The silence after days of howling wind was almost deafening. They dug out the wagon and checked the horses, relieved to find them all in good health despite the ordeal. The 2 miles to Zara's cabin became an exhausting trek through snow that sometimes came up to their waists. The horses struggled but pushed on, and by late afternoon they finally reached her property. The cabin was small but sturdy, built from local timber and chinked against the weather. Snow had drifted against the door, but once they cleared it, they found everything inside just as Zara had left it. There was a proper fireplace, a real bed, shelves lined with preserves and supplies, and most importantly, space to breathe. Gabriel knew he should leave, should continue on to Eureka Springs and sell his horses before winter set in completely. But when he opened his mouth to say goodbye, different words came out instead. "Your roof needs repair before the next snow, and that chimney could use cleaning. If you would like, I could stay a few days and help." Zara's face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. "I would like that very much." Those few days turned into a week, then 2. Gabriel found endless tasks that needed doing around the cabin. He repaired the roof, reinforced the barn that Zara's father had started building, and split enough firewood to last through the winter. Zara cooked meals that were the best things he had tasted in years, mended his clothes without being asked, and helped with every project he started. They worked side by side during the days and sat by the fire at night, talking about everything under the sun. Gabriel told her about the places he had been, the things he had seen, and slowly, the things he had felt. Zara shared her dreams for the property, her fears about making it alone, and her growing certainty that she did not want to be alone anymore. The first time Gabriel kissed her, it was snowing again. They had been working to clear a path to the barn when Zara slipped on the ice. Gabriel caught her, and suddenly they were face to face, breath mingling in the cold air. He saw the question in her eyes, the hope and fear mixed together, and knew his own expression mirrored it. He kissed her softly, tentatively, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her cold hands coming up to cup his face. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling like fools. "I was wondering when you would do that," Zara said breathlessly. "I was wondering if I was imagining that you wanted me to," Gabriel admitted. "You were not imagining it. After that, everything changed and nothing changed." They still worked together during the days, still talked by the fire at night, but now there were stolen kisses and held hands, whispered confessions and shared dreams. Gabriel told himself he was staying just until spring, just until the passes cleared and he could take his horses to market. But as December gave way to January, he knew he was lying to himself. He was falling in love with Zara Ellsworth, and the thought of leaving her was becoming unbearable. January brought more snow and bitter cold, but it also brought a quiet joy that Gabriel had never known. He and Zara settled into a domestic rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. She taught him to bake bread, laughing at his first attempts that came out hard as rocks. He taught her to read weather signs, to judge when a storm was coming by the behavior of the horses and the quality of the light. On the coldest nights, they huddled together in front of the fire, sharing the single quilt Zara had brought from Ohio. Gabriel would read aloud from the few books Zara owned, his deep voice filling the cabin while she leaned against his shoulder. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind outside. "What will you do in the spring?" Zara asked one evening in late January. The question had been hanging between them for weeks, unspoken but always present. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I have been thinking about that," he said finally. "I need to take the horses to market. They have eaten most of your winter stores, and I need to pay you back for that." "You have more than paid me back with all the work you have done," Zara protested. "Even so, but after I sell them." He turned to look at her, his heart pounding. "If you would have me, I would like to come back, to stay, to help you build your father's dream if you would let me be part of it." Zara's eyes filled with tears. "Gabriel Nash, are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I came to Arkansas planning to sell some horses and move on, like I always do. Instead, I got trapped in a blizzard with a stubborn, beautiful woman who has somehow become the most important person in my world. I am saying that I do not want to drift anymore. I want to build something that lasts. With you." She kissed him then, tears streaming down her face, and Gabriel knew he had found what he had been searching for all his life without even knowing he was searching. A home, a purpose, someone to love who loved him back. "Yes," Zara whispered against his lips. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in February by a circuit preacher who made his way up to the cabin on snowshoes. The ceremony was simple, with only a trapper and his wife who lived 5 miles away as witnesses, but it was perfect. Zara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and Gabriel wore the new shirt she had sewn for him from fabric she had been saving for something special. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel felt a rightness settle over him that he had never experienced before. This was where he was meant to be. This was who he was meant to be with. The rest of February and all of March were a honeymoon period, even as they continued to work hard to maintain the cabin and care for the animals. They were learning each other in new ways now, as spouses rather than friends. Gabriel discovered that Zara sang in her sleep sometimes, soft, wordless melodies that made him smile in the darkness. Zara learned that Gabriel had nightmares occasionally, echoes of a childhood he rarely spoke about, and that holding him close would chase them away. They made plans for the future, sketching out designs for an expanded barn, discussing which horses to breed first, debating whether to focus on work horses like Zara's father had wanted, or to include some riding horses as well. Gabriel's experience with horses combined with Zara's business sense made them a formidable team. "We could build a reputation for quality," Zara said one evening, adding numbers in the ledger she had started keeping. "People will pay good money for horses they can trust." "It will take time," Gabriel warned. "Years, probably, before we are really established." "We have time," Zara said, reaching for his hand. "We have all the time in the world." When the first green shoots began pushing through the melting snow in early April, Gabriel prepared to take his horses to market. It was harder to leave than he had expected, even knowing he would be back within 2 weeks. Zara stood on the cabin porch, one hand resting on her stomach, waving as he rode away leading the string of horses. He had noticed her morning sickness the week before, though she thought she was hiding it. He had not said anything, waiting for her to tell him in her own time, but the knowledge filled him with a joy so profound it almost scared him. A child. Their child. Another piece of the life they were building together. Eureka Springs had changed little in the months since he had last passed through, but Gabriel saw it differently now. Before, it had just been another town, a place to conduct business before moving on. Now, it was the closest thing to civilization near his home, a place where his wife could get supplies and see a doctor when the time came. He conducted his business quickly, getting good prices for the horses and using the money to buy supplies they would need. Fabric for baby clothes. A cradle one of the local craftsmen had for sale. Seeds for a larger vegetable garden. Everything he needed to build a life, not just survive. On his way out of town, Gabriel stopped at the land office. The cabin and property had been in Zara's father's name, but it needed to be properly transferred and registered. While he was there, Gabriel noticed the property adjacent to theirs was available. It was rougher land, heavily forested, but it would give them room to expand and provided good timber for building. He bought it without hesitation, signing his name with pride. Gabriel Nash, landowner, husband, soon-to-be father. All the things he had never imagined for himself. The ride back to the cabin took 3 days, and Gabriel found himself pushing harder each day, eager to be home. When the cabin finally came into view on the 3rd evening, his heart soared. Smoke curled from the chimney, and he could see Zara working in the garden plot they had cleared together, taking advantage of the longer daylight. She looked up at the sound of his horse and dropped her hoe, running toward him with a joy that mirrored his own. He dismounted and caught her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. "I missed you," she said, kissing him thoroughly. "I missed you too. And someone else, I think," he added, placing his hand gently on her stomach. Zara's eyes widened. "You knew, I suspected." "Were you going to tell me?" "I was waiting to be sure. I am sure now. Gabriel, we are going to have a baby." He kissed her again, tasting her joy and tears and laughter all mixed together. "I bought the land next to ours," he said when they finally broke apart. "And a cradle. And probably too much fabric, but the woman at the store said you would know what to do with it." Zara laughed, wiping her eyes. "Come inside. I have stew ready and you can tell me everything." Over dinner, Gabriel told her about the prices he had gotten for the horses, about the supplies he had purchased, about his plans for the new land. Zara shared what she had accomplished while he was gone, the seeds she had planted, the wild turkeys she had spotted that might be good for starting a flock. They talked long into the night, making plans, dreaming dreams, building their future one word at a time. May brought warmer weather and a flurry of activity. Gabriel began clearing trees on the new property, using the timber to expand the barn and build a proper stable. Zara worked on the garden, planting vegetables and herbs, creating a space that would help feed them through the next winter. Her pregnancy was progressing well, and though she tired more easily now, she refused to slow down. "I am having a baby, not dying of consumption," she said when Gabriel tried to get her to rest. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." Still, he worried. The nearest doctor was in Eureka Springs, a hard journey that would be nearly impossible if she went into labor during bad weather. He made arrangements with the trapper's wife, who had experience with births, to be on call when the time came. He also made sure they had plenty of supplies, clean linens, and everything the midwife said they would need. As spring turned to summer, their hard work began to show results. The expanded barn was complete, ready to house the horses they planned to acquire. The garden was flourishing, promising a good harvest. Gabriel had started breaking some of the younger horses, preparing them for sale in the fall. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch Gabriel had built, watching the sun set over the mountains and feeling the baby move beneath Zara's hand. These were the moments Gabriel treasured most, the quiet times when it was just the two of them and the life they had created together. "You ever regret it?" Zara asked one evening. "Giving up the drifting life?" "Not for a second," Gabriel said honestly. "I thought I wanted freedom, but I was just running. From loneliness, from the fear of losing someone I cared about. You gave me something worth staying for." "You gave me that too," Zara said softly. "I thought I could do this alone, that I had to do it alone to honor my father's memory. But building it with you is so much better than anything I could have done by myself." July brought sweltering heat and afternoon thunderstorms that rolled through the mountains like clockwork. Gabriel worked shirtless in the heat, his skin bronzing under the sun, while Zara sought shade and tried to stay cool. The baby was growing, her belly round and full, and Gabriel found himself talking to it sometimes when he thought Zara was not listening. "Your mama is the strongest woman I know," he would say, one hand resting on her stomach. "You are lucky to have her. We both are." In August, they acquired their first breeding pair, a mare and stallion, both young and healthy with good lines and strong builds. Gabriel had traded work for them, spending 2 weeks helping a rancher break horses in exchange for his pick of the foals. He chose well, selecting animals that would be the foundation of their herd. Zara named the mare Sunshine for her golden coat, and the stallion Thunder for the way he stamped and snorted. They were the beginning of something bigger, the first real step toward the dream she and her father had shared. "He would have loved this," Zara said, watching the horses explore their new home. "My father, he would have loved seeing this come together." "Tell me about him," Gabriel said. He had heard stories before, but he never tired of them. Zara spoke about her father's endless optimism, his determination to start over after her mother died, his unwavering belief that hard work and honest dealing would lead to success. She talked about his laugh, his terrible singing voice, and the way he had always made her feel like she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. "You would have liked him," she concluded, "and he would have loved you. He always said the measure of a man was not where he came from, but what he chose to do with the chances he was given." "I hope I am living up to that," Gabriel said. "You are," Zara assured him. "Every single day you are." September brought cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color in the trees. Zara was huge now, uncomfortable and eager for the pregnancy to be over. The midwife had examined her and pronounced everything normal, predicting the baby would come in early October. Gabriel found himself watching Zara constantly, alert for any sign that labor was beginning. He had never been so nervous in his life, not even during the blizzard that had brought them together. The thought of something going wrong, of losing her or the baby, terrified him in a way that nothing else ever had. "Stop hovering," Zara said, exasperated but fond. "I will tell you when something is happening. I just want to be ready. You are ready. We both are. Now go check on the horses before you drive me mad with your pacing." Gabriel went, but he did not go far, and he kept glancing back toward the cabin, unable to shake the feeling that everything was about to change. He was right. Zara's labor began on a crisp October morning. 3 days after she had insisted, she had at least another week to go. Gabriel sent word to the midwife, and then did his best to stay calm and helpful while Zara worked through the contractions. It was the longest day of his life. The midwife arrived by early afternoon and took over, sending Gabriel outside with firm instructions to keep himself busy. He tried to work, but found himself pacing instead, listening to every sound from the cabin, praying harder than he ever had in his life. Evening was falling when he heard it. The sharp, indignant cry of a newborn. Gabriel was moving before he realized it, bursting through the cabin door to find the midwife cleaning a squirming bundle while Zara lay exhausted but smiling on the bed. "You have a son," the midwife announced. "A healthy, strong boy with good lungs." Gabriel crossed to Zara's side, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "Are you all right?" "Tired," she admitted. "But all right. Do you want to meet him?" The midwife placed the baby in Gabriel's arms, and he looked down into the scrunched red face of his son. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny fists waving in the air, and Gabriel felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Hello there," he whispered. "I am your papa." The baby quieted at his voice, seeming to listen, and Gabriel felt tears prick his eyes. They named him Thomas, after Zara's father, with Gabriel's last name of Nash. Thomas Gabriel Nash, born October 8, 1888, in a small cabin in the Arkansas mountains to parents who loved him more than they had known it was possible to love. The first weeks with Thomas were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. He was a good baby, content to eat and sleep and gaze around with curious dark eyes. Gabriel found himself enchanted by every little thing the baby did, from his tiny yawns to the way he gripped Gabriel's finger with surprising strength. Zara recovered well from the birth, and by November she was back to her normal activities, though Gabriel insisted on helping more with the household chores so she could focus on Thomas. They had settled into a new rhythm as a family of 3, learning as they went. Winter came again, bringing snow and cold, but this year was different. This year they were prepared, with a full larder and plenty of firewood and a warm cabin to shelter in. Gabriel no longer felt the restless urge to move on when the weather turned bad. Instead, he was content to spend the short days working around the property and the long evenings with his wife and son. On the anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, Gabriel and Zara bundled Thomas up and walked out to the shelter where they had spent those first crucial days. It was still standing, weathered but solid, a monument to the strange twist of fate that had changed both their lives. "Can you believe it has only been a year?" Zara marveled, shifting Thomas to her other hip. "It feels like a lifetime." "A good lifetime," Gabriel said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "The best," she agreed. "I used to be so lonely up here before you came. I told myself I was fine, that I did not need anyone, but I was lying to myself. Now I cannot imagine going a single day without you." "You will never have to," Gabriel promised. "I am not going anywhere." They stood there together, the three of them, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. A year ago, Gabriel had been a drifter with no ties and no plans beyond the next town. Now he was a husband, a father, a landowner, and a dreamer. He had found a place to belong and people to belong with. "I love you," he said to Zara, the words coming easier now than they had at first. "I love you too," she replied, kissing him softly. "Now let us go home before Thomas freezes." Home. The word had never meant much to Gabriel before. Now it meant everything. The years that followed were filled with hard work, slow progress, and deep happiness. By Thomas's second birthday, the horse breeding operation was beginning to show real promise. They had 3 breeding mares now, plus Thunder and several youngsters in various stages of training. Word was spreading about the quality of Nash horses, and buyers were starting to make the trek up to the cabin specifically to see what they had available. Gabriel proved to have a gift not just for breaking horses, but for breeding them. He could look at a mare and stallion and predict what qualities their offspring would have. His gentling methods produced horses that were not just obedient, but genuinely partnered with their riders. People were willing to pay premium prices for animals with that kind of temperament. Zara handled the business side, keeping meticulous records, managing finances, and negotiating with buyers. Her father would have been proud of the head for business she had developed. Together, she and Gabriel made a formidable team, their skills complementing each other perfectly. Thomas grew into a cheerful, adventurous toddler who loved the horses almost as much as his parents did. He took his first steps trying to reach Thunder's stall and said "horse" before he said "mama" or "papa," much to everyone's amusement. Gabriel would set him on the gentlest mare's back and lead them around the paddock, Thomas shrieking with laughter the whole time. In the spring of 1891, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and she worked almost until the day she went into labor in early December. This time they had a daughter, a tiny thing with Zara's dark hair and what would prove to be Gabriel's gray eyes. They named her Margaret Rose, calling her Maggie from the start. Where Thomas had been an easy baby, Maggie was demanding, wanting to be held constantly and protesting loudly when she did not get her way. But she also brought fierce joy to the family, completing them in a way none of them had quite realized they needed. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Gabriel would often find him singing to her, the same wordless melodies that Zara hummed, passed down through the generations. "We are building something good here," Zara said one evening, watching Gabriel rock Maggie while Thomas played with wooden horses at their feet. "Not just the business, but this, our family." "We are," Gabriel agreed. "Sometimes I still cannot quite believe it is real, that I am allowed to have this." "You more than anyone deserve this," Zara said firmly. "You are the best man I know, Gabriel Nash, the best husband, the best father. Do not ever doubt that you deserve every bit of happiness we have found." Gabriel did not argue. He had learned over the years that Zara was usually right, especially about things like this. Instead, he just pulled her close with his free arm and kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair and the warmth of his family around him. By 1893, the Nash Horse Ranch was well established. They had expanded the barn twice, built a proper house with separate bedrooms for the children, and acquired enough breeding stock to have a waiting list for their horses. Gabriel had hired 2 young men from town to help with the work, and Zara had taken on an apprentice who wanted to learn the business side of ranching. They had also become pillars of the small mountain community. Gabriel used his skills to help neighbors with difficult horses, never accepting payment but always willing to trade work or advice. Zara had started a lending library out of their home, allowing the scattered families to share the few books that made it up the mountain. They hosted gatherings in the summer, barn dances and church socials that brought the isolated community together. Thomas, now 5, was already showing signs of inheriting his father's way with horses. He could calm a nervous animal with a touch and seemed to understand what they were thinking almost before they did. Gabriel began teaching him in earnest, showing him how to read a horse's body language and respond appropriately. Maggie, at 2, was more interested in following her mother around, learning to cook and garden and keep house. But she also had a stubborn independence that promised she would forge her own path when she was ready. On a warm summer evening in 1894, Gabriel and Zara sat on their porch watching the children play in the yard. 6 years had passed since that blizzard had trapped them together. 6 years that had transformed both their lives. "You remember what you said that first night in the shelter?" Zara asked. "About how you planned to eventually settle somewhere and start a ranch." "I remember thinking I was telling you a pretty lie," Gabriel admitted. "Something to fill the silence. I never really believed I would do it." "But you did. We did. We did," he agreed. "And it is better than anything I imagined back then." "It is not just the ranch, though, is it?" Zara pressed. "I mean, yes, we have built something successful, but the real achievement is this, us, our family." Gabriel looked at his wife, seeing the lines that had begun to form around her eyes from years of smiling, the strength in her shoulders from hard work, the contentment in her expression. He thought about the scared, lonely woman he had met on that snowy mountain path, and the scared, lonely man he had been. They had both been trapped by more than just the blizzard that day. They had been trapped by fear and grief, and the belief that they had to face everything alone. "You saved my life," Gabriel said quietly. "Not just in the blizzard, though you did that too, but you saved me from a life of drifting, of never putting down roots because I was too afraid of what might happen if I did. You showed me that the risk was worth it." "You saved me too," Zara replied. "I was so determined to prove I could do everything myself that I was closing myself off from any possibility of real connection. You showed me that accepting help was not weakness, and that building something together was better than doing it alone." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas had climbed into the lower branches of an oak tree, and Maggie was demanding he help her up too. Their voices carried on the evening air, full of life and laughter. "I want more," Zara said suddenly. Gabriel looked at her in surprise. "More children, more everything, more years together, more memories, more of this life we have built. I know we cannot control how much time we get, but I want to fill whatever time we have with as much love and joy as possible." "That sounds perfect to me," Gabriel said, taking her hand. As if sensing the moment, Thomas and Maggie came running over, demanding their parents come see something they had found in the garden. Gabriel and Zara let themselves be pulled to their feet, led by small hands to examine what turned out to be a particularly large beetle. This was their life now. Not grand adventures or dramatic rescues, but the small daily moments that added up to something extraordinary. Teaching their son to gentle a horse, braiding their daughter's hair, harvesting vegetables from the garden, sitting together by the fire on cold nights. Building, year by year, a legacy of love. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons. Thomas grew tall and lean like his father, with the same quiet competence around horses. By the time he was 10, people were coming specifically to have him train their animals, trusting his young hands more than those of grown men. Gabriel watched his son's development with fierce pride, seeing in him everything good he had hoped to pass on. Maggie grew into a force of nature, stubborn and smart and utterly fearless. She learned to ride almost before she could walk properly, and by 8 she could outshoot most of the boys in town. She also had her mother's head for business, often suggesting improvements to their operations that proved remarkably effective. In 1898, Zara gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Samuel. He was quieter than his siblings, more thoughtful, with a gentleness that manifested in a love for all growing things. While Thomas worked with the horses and Maggie helped her mother with the accounts, Samuel tended the gardens and began learning about medicinal herbs from the old woman who lived down the mountain. Gabriel was 40 years old now, his hair showing touches of gray at the temples. His body bore the marks of years of hard work, scars and calluses, and the permanent squint of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. But he had never been happier. Every morning he woke beside the woman he loved. Every day he worked at something meaningful, and every night he gathered his family around him and counted his blessings. "You ever think about that blizzard?" he asked Zara one winter evening as they prepared for bed. Outside, snow was falling again, though nothing like the storm that had brought them together. "All the time," she admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing everything. If you had ridden past without stopping, if we had not made it to the shelter, if the storm had lasted just a few days longer than our supplies held out, so many things could have gone wrong. But they did not." "But they did not," she echoed. "Instead, I found you, or you found me. However it happened, I will be grateful for that storm for the rest of my life." Gabriel pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. "I love you, Zara Nash, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too. And I am so glad you stopped that day. So glad you were the kind of man who could not ride past someone in need. I am glad you were stubborn enough to stay on this mountain by yourself," Gabriel countered. "If you had given up and gone back to Ohio, I never would have met you." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Zara said thoughtfully. "I do not know how, but I think we were meant to be together. The universe would have found a way." Gabriel was not sure he believed in fate or destiny. His life had taught him that most things came down to chance and choice. But he wanted to believe that there was some greater force that had brought them together that day. It made the randomness of the world seem a little less frightening, knowing that some things were meant to be. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. The Nash Ranch was now one of the most respected horse operations in Arkansas, with buyers coming from as far away as Texas and Oklahoma. Thomas, at 12, was talking about expanding into cattle as well. Maggie, at 9, had announced her intention to be the first female horse trader in the state. Samuel, just 2, was content to toddle after his siblings and play in the dirt. Gabriel and Zara watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness that time was passing too quickly. It seemed like just yesterday they had brought Thomas home as a tiny bundle, and now he was nearly as tall as Gabriel and talking in a voice that was beginning to deepen. "They are going to leave us someday," Zara said, voicing the thought they both had. "They are going to grow up and have their own lives, and this house will be empty again." "Not for a long while yet," Gabriel said, though he knew she was right. "And even when they do, they will come back. This is their home. It will always be their home. I know. I just want to hold onto these years, these moments when they still need us for everything." Gabriel understood. He felt the same urgency sometimes, the need to memorize every detail of his children's faces, every sound of their laughter, every moment of their presence. He had missed so much of his own childhood, had no memories of parents or family gatherings or feeling truly safe. He wanted to give his children everything he had never had, wanted to build memories that would sustain them long after he was gone. But he also knew he could not stop time, could not keep them small and dependent forever. The best he could do was love them fiercely while they were here and trust that he and Zara had given them the tools they needed to build good lives of their own. In 1905, disaster nearly struck when a wildfire swept through the mountains. Gabriel and Thomas worked frantically to create fire breaks around their property, while Zara and Maggie wetted down the buildings. Samuel, now 7, helped evacuate the horses to a meadow they hoped would be safe. The fire came within a quarter-mile of their home before the wind shifted and rain began to fall, saving them from destruction. That night, covered in soot and exhausted beyond measure, the family gathered in the house they had almost lost. Gabriel looked around at his wife and children, all safe, all here, and felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. "We could have lost everything today," he said hoarsely. "But we did not," Zara replied, echoing the words they had said to each other so many times over the years. "We are still here. We are still together. We rebuild what burned," Thomas added, his young face serious. "That is what we do. We keep going." "That is what we do," Gabriel agreed, pulling his oldest son close. "We keep going, together." The fire had destroyed some of their pasture land and damaged a section of fence, but the main buildings had been spared. They spent the fall repairing and rebuilding, the work made lighter by the knowledge of how much worse it could have been. Neighbors came to help, repaying the many times Gabriel and his family had assisted them. The community they had helped build over the years was there when they needed it most. By 1910, Thomas was 22 and courting a girl from Eureka Springs. Maggie was 19 and had become an expert rider and trader, just as she had promised. Samuel, at 12, had discovered a talent for woodworking and was making beautiful furniture in his spare time. The ranch was more successful than ever, and Gabriel and Zara had enough money saved that they no longer worried about hard winters or lean years. Gabriel was 50 now, feeling the years in his joints and the occasional gray day when old injuries ached. But he was healthy and strong, able to work alongside his sons and still break horses when the mood struck him. Zara was 47, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her hands calloused from decades of hard work. She was more beautiful to Gabriel than she had been at 23, her face showing the marks of a life well lived. They still sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Sometimes the children joined them, and sometimes it was just the two of them, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of knowing each other. 22 years, Zara said one evening, her hand in Gabriel's. "Since that blizzard." "Best 22 years of my life," Gabriel replied. "Mine too. Though I have to admit, when I first saw you riding up that day, I did not imagine this is how things would turn out." "What did you imagine?" "That you would help me with the wagon and then disappear like everyone else who passed through," Zara admitted. "I never imagined you would stay. I never imagined any of this." "I could not have imagined it either. I did not even know it was possible to be this happy." They sat in silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses whinnied. In the house behind them, they could hear Maggie and Samuel arguing about something, their voices loud but affectionate. Thomas had ridden into town but would be back before full dark. This was their life. The one they had built together from nothing, starting with a blizzard and a chance meeting and growing into something neither of them could have planned or predicted. It had not always been easy. There had been hard winters and lean times, sick children and failed crops, moments when Gabriel had wondered if he was strong enough to be the husband and father his family needed. But Zara had always been there, steady and strong, believing in him even when he did not believe in himself. And he had been there for her, a partner in every sense of the word, sharing the burdens and the joys equally. "I would do it all again," Gabriel said suddenly. "Every hard moment, every struggle, I would do it all again for this." "So would I," Zara agreed, without hesitation. Thomas married his sweetheart in the spring of 1911, bringing a new daughter-in-law into the family. Her name was Catherine, and she fit into the family as if she had always been there. By the end of the year, she was pregnant with the first of Gabriel and Zara's grandchildren. Watching his son navigate marriage and impending fatherhood made Gabriel nostalgic for those early days with Zara. He remembered the uncertainty, the wonder of it all, the fear of doing something wrong mixed with the joy of building a life together. He gave Thomas what advice he could, but mostly he just watched and remembered. "You are thinking about when we started out," Zara said, reading his mind as she so often did. "I am. Remembering how scared I was, how sure I was that I would mess it all up somehow. But you did not." "We did not," Gabriel corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you. We saved each other," Zara said simply. "That is what love does." The first grandchild arrived in the summer of 1912, a boy they named Gabriel after his grandfather. Holding his tiny namesake in his arms, Gabriel felt the circle of life turning. He was no longer the young man who had stumbled into fatherhood unsure of what he was doing. He was a grandfather now, with decades of experience to draw on. "You are going to spoil him rotten," Zara accused fondly, watching Gabriel coo at the baby. "That is what grandparents are for," Gabriel replied unrepentantly. More grandchildren followed over the years. Thomas and Catherine had 4 children in total. Maggie eventually married a horse trader from Oklahoma and gave them 3 more. Even Samuel, quiet Samuel, found love with the doctor's daughter from Eureka Springs and added 2 more grandchildren to the growing family. The ranch expanded to include the next generation. Thomas took over the day-to-day operations, freeing Gabriel to focus on the breeding program he loved. Maggie's husband brought new contacts and markets. Samuel's wife, with her medical knowledge, proved invaluable during foaling season and when animals took sick. Gabriel and Zara slowly stepped back from the hard physical labor, though neither could quite bring themselves to stop working entirely. Gabriel still spent hours in the barns, teaching his grandchildren about horses the way he had taught their parents. Zara maintained her ledgers and occasionally handled negotiations when a particularly difficult buyer came through. In 1920, Gabriel turned 60. The family threw him a party that brought people from all over the county. He stood in the barn they had converted for the occasion, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, and could hardly believe this was his life. The orphan who had never known family now had more family than he could count. "Make a speech," someone called out. Gabriel was not much for public speaking, but he cleared his throat and looked around at all the faces turned toward him. "I am not good with words," he started. "Never have been, but I want to say thank you. To my wife, who took a chance on a drifter and made him into a better man than he ever thought he could be. To my children, who taught me what it means to love unconditionally. To my grandchildren, who remind me every day why it is all worth it. And to all of you, for being part of our lives." He raised his glass. 32 years ago, I got caught in a blizzard that changed everything. I thought I was just helping a stranger with a wagon. Instead, I found my whole world. Here is to second chances, to taking risks, and to the storms that bring us exactly where we need to be." Everyone drank to that, and then the music started and the celebration continued. Gabriel found Zara in the crowd and pulled her close, dancing with her like they had at their simple wedding so many years ago. "Happy?" she asked. "Happier than I have any right to be," Gabriel replied. "You have every right," Zara said firmly. "You have earned every moment of this happiness." They danced until Gabriel's knees protested, then sat and watched the younger generations take over the dance floor. Thomas whirled Catherine around while their children danced with their cousins. Maggie's loud laugh rang out from across the room. Samuel sat in a corner with some of the other men, deep in conversation about something that looked serious but was probably just the price of hay. "We did good," Gabriel said, nodding toward their family. "We did very good," Zara agreed. The 1920s brought changes to the country and to their corner of Arkansas. The automobile became common, making trips to town faster, but also bringing more strangers through. The telephone lines reached their area, connecting them to the wider world in ways they had never been before. Young people were leaving the mountains for cities, chasing dreams of modern life and easy money. But the Nash Ranch remained constant, a touchstone of tradition in a rapidly changing world. They still bred horses the old-fashioned way, with patience and care. They still welcomed neighbors in need and helped build their community. The values Gabriel and Zara had established all those years ago continued to guide the family. Gabriel and Zara aged together, their bodies slowing but their minds and spirits still sharp. Gabriel's hair was completely white now, his face deeply lined from decades of sun and wind. Zara moved more stiffly, arthritis in her hands making the work she loved harder. But they still rose with the sun most mornings, still found joy in the daily rhythms of ranch life. "Do you know what I realized the other day?" Zara said one evening as they sat on the porch. "We have been married for almost 40 years. I have spent more of my life with you than without you." "I can barely remember what life was like before you," Gabriel admitted. "It is like my life truly started that day in the blizzard." "Mine too. Everything before that was just prologue. The real story began when we met." Gabriel reached for her hand, his fingers automatically finding the familiar shape of hers. They fit together perfectly as they always had, worn smooth by decades of holding on to each other. In the fall of 1927, Gabriel suffered a minor heart attack while working in the barn. It was not serious, the doctor said, but it was a warning. He needed to slow down, take it easier, let the younger generation handle the heavy work. Gabriel grumbled but complied, knowing that Zara would worry herself sick if he did not. The scare reminded both of them that their time was not infinite. They were in their late 60s now, old by any standard, and while they hoped for more years together, there were no guarantees. "Promise me something," Gabriel said one night as they lay in bed. "If something happens to me, do not mourn too long. I want you to keep living, keep finding joy." "Only if you promise the same," Zara replied, "though I hope we have many more years before either of us has to keep that promise." "So do I. I am not ready to leave you yet. There is still so much I want to do with you." "Like what?" "Like this. Exactly this. Lying here with you, knowing our family is safe and happy. Watching our grandchildren grow. Growing old with the woman I love. That is all I want." Zara kissed him softly. "Then that is what we will do for as long as we can." They did have more years. 5 more good years where they watched grandchildren marry and great-grandchildren arrive. Years where the ranch continued to prosper under the guidance of the next generation. Years of quiet contentment, of memories made and cherished. Gabriel Nash died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1932, just a few months shy of his 72nd birthday. He went to bed beside Zara, kissed her goodnight like he had done thousands of times before, and simply did not wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out after 7 decades of hard use but peaceful at the end. Zara was devastated but not destroyed. Gabriel had given her 44 years of love, had helped her build a family and a legacy that would outlast them both. She grieved deeply, but also celebrated the life they had shared, refusing to let sorrow overshadow the joy of having known him. At his funeral, the church in Eureka Springs was packed with family, friends, and people whose lives Gabriel had touched over the years. Zara stood strong as person after person shared stories of Gabriel's kindness, his skill with horses, his quiet strength. Thomas gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears, talking about his father's journey from orphan drifter to beloved patriarch. "My father used to say that he got lucky the day a blizzard trapped him with my mother," Thomas said. "But we all got lucky that day. Because that storm gave us Gabriel Nash, and through him, we learned what it means to choose family, to build something lasting, and to love without reservation." Zara lived another 3 years after Gabriel's death. She spent them surrounded by family, passing on stories and wisdom to the younger generations. She told them about the blizzard, about those first uncertain days with Gabriel, about building a life from nothing. She wanted them to understand that the ranch they now took for granted had started with 2 people, a dream and a willingness to take a chance on each other. On a warm spring morning in 1935, almost exactly 47 years after that fateful blizzard, Zara Nash passed away in her sleep, just as Gabriel had. She was laid to rest beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone read simply, "Gabriel Nash, 1860–1932, Zara Ellsworth Nash, 1864–1935, together forever." The ranch continued under Thomas's leadership, then eventually his children, and so on through the generations. The story of Gabriel and Zara became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of where they all came from. The shelter where they had weathered that first blizzard was maintained and preserved, becoming a sort of shrine to the beginning of it all. Every winter, when the first snow fell, someone would make the trek out to that shelter and remember. Remember 2 strangers who became partners, who built a family and a legacy from nothing. Remember that sometimes the storms that seem like disasters are actually divine intervention, putting us exactly where we need to be. The Nash Ranch still operates today, one of the oldest continuously running horse operations in Arkansas. The current generation knows the story by heart, how their ancestors met in a blizzard, how they fell in love while trapped together, how they could not imagine life without each other by the time spring arrived. It is a reminder that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places, and that choosing to help a stranger might just change your entire world. Gabriel and Zara's story ended long ago, but its echoes continue, in the horses that still bear the Nash name, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren who carry their legacy, in the values they established and the love they shared. They were just 2 people who met by chance and chose each other by design, a drifter looking for purpose, a woman protecting her father's dream, a blizzard that trapped them together, and by spring, a love so deep that neither could imagine life without the other. It was a simple story, really. But it was also everything, and in the end, that was more than enough.